Choose one, human, and understand that your answer will decide whether Earth remains a world or becomes a footnote. That was how Emperor Kael Vorith addressed Nathan Cole before the entire imperial court, as if the man from Earth had been invited to a wedding instead of dragged into the most dangerous political trap in 9 sectors. I was there, standing 30 feet from the obsidian throne with my recorder crystal hovering beside my shoulder, preparing to document what I assumed would be a brief and embarrassing end to humanity's little diplomatic experiment. My name is Lord Arvex Wren, Royal Witness of the Vorith Empire, Keeper of Legal Memory, Historian of Conquest, Professional Observer of Fools, and I will admit this now because the record demands honesty. I thought Nathan Cole looked absurd. He stood just under 6 feet tall, pale-skinned, broad-shouldered by human standards, wearing a plain dark suit that had no armor, no ceremonial jewels, no family crest, no visible weapon, and no expression that made sense for a creature facing an empire that could darken entire star lanes with warships. On his left stood Princess Valara Thorn, first daughter of the throne, commander of the Imperial Spear fleets, draped in silver-blue armor polished bright enough to reflect the ceiling stars. On his right stood Princess Solara Voss, second daughter of the throne, architect of treaties, keeper of royal blood contracts, dressed in white and violet robes that carried enough legal authority to bind a dozen planets without firing a single shot. The Emperor had arranged them perfectly. War on one side, diplomacy on the other, both smiling like doors that only opened into cages. Around us, the court watched from rising rings of black glass, thousands of nobles, admirals, judges, and trade lords leaning forward to enjoy the little Earth male's humiliation. They had all been told the same thing. Humans were sentimental. Humans were impulsive. Humans chose with their hearts and then spent generations paying for it. The Emperor's plan was elegant in the cruel way imperial politics often pretended to be elegant. If Nathan chose Valara, Earth would be folded into the military command structure as a protected combat territory. If he chose Solara, Earth would be bound by marriage law precedent into a century of tribute and diplomatic obedience. If he refused to choose, the court would declare humanity ungrateful, unstable, and unworthy of sovereign recognition. 3 paths, 3 chains. That was the genius of it. Or so we believed. Emperor Kael raised one jeweled hand, and the hall became so quiet I could hear the soft click of Nathan's shoes as he shifted his weight. You have been given an honor beyond your species, the Emperor said. A union with one of my daughters. A place under my banner. A future. Several nobles laughed softly at that, the kind of laugh powerful creatures use when they want the weaker creature to know it is already owned. Nathan looked up at the throne, not at the fleets projected behind it, not at the execution of law written into the floor beneath his feet, not even at the 2 princesses standing beside him. He looked directly at the Emperor, and then he smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough. A small human smile. At the time, I thought it was nerves. I was wrong. It was the first crack in the Empire. That smile should have ended him. Not legally, of course. The Vorith Empire had rules about harming invited representatives, even when those representatives arrived from a planet the court considered barely civilized. But socially, politically, historically, that smile should have buried Nathan Cole under a mountain of imperial contempt. In our court, you bowed with your eyes before you bowed with your body. You showed fear because fear was considered honest. You showed gratitude because gratitude was considered appropriate. You did not stand beneath the obsidian throne, surrounded by 300 feet of royal banners and 1,000 witnesses, and smile at Emperor Kael Vorith like he had just made a spelling mistake on a restaurant menu. A low murmur rolled through the hall. Admiral Vare clicked his lower tusks in offense. Magistrate Oren leaned toward his assistant and whispered something sharp enough to make both of them glance at the human's throat, not with threat, but with disbelief at the softness of it. Princess Valara narrowed her golden eyes. Princess Solara did something stranger. She stopped smiling. I noticed because I was trained to notice everything. The second princess had worn a court smile since childhood, a perfect diplomatic mask, so polished it might as well have been carved from moonstone. But when Nathan smiled, her expression faltered for half a second. Not fear. Recognition. That detail would matter later. At the time, I dismissed it because dismissing humans had become a comfortable habit for the entire galaxy. Nathan lowered his gaze at last, but not in submission. His eyes moved across the floor. That irritated me more than the smile. The imperial floor was not decoration. It was law. Every inch of black stone beneath him carried thin lines of silver script, ancient clauses from the founding compact of the Vorth throne. Visitors admired it. Scholars memorized it. Prisoners trembled on it. Nathan read it. Slowly, quietly, like a man checking the fine print before signing a used car contract in Ohio. The emperor saw it too, and for the first time that day, his fingers tightened around the armrest of the throne. "Human," Kale said, voice smooth but colder now. "Your silence insults the generosity of this house." The nobles approved of that. They always approved of coldness when it came from above. Nathan looked back up. "I was not trying to insult anyone." His translator rendered the words clearly, but it could not translate the tone. Calm, almost polite. Terrible tone, really. Far too even for a creature trapped between two royal futures. "I just want to understand the offer before I answer." Laughter broke out in the upper rings. Not loud. Not yet. The court was too refined for open mockery this early, but it was there, rustling across the black glass like insects under paper. Lord Mavrin, who owned half the mining rights beyond the eastern arm, raised his voice. "The primitive wants to understand imperial marriage law." More laughter. Nathan did not look at him. That was the second mistake we noticed too late. Humans, we had been told, reacted to insult. Their pulses rose. Their faces colored. Their voices sharpened. Nathan did none of that. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides and looked only at the emperor. "Are both princesses free to decline?" The question was so simple that several nobles laughed again before realizing no one important had joined them. Princess Veilira's armor made a faint sound as she turned her head toward him. Princess Salira went completely still. Emperor Kale did not answer at once. It was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds. In imperial politics, 2 seconds can be a confession. My recorder crystal brightened beside me, sensing historical tension before I did. Nathan saw the pause. Of course he did. The smile faded from his face, leaving something much worse behind. Patience. Not anger. Not fear. Patience. And that was when the first nervous silence touched the edge of the hall. The emperor finally answered, and he did it with the kind of patience powerful creatures reserve for children and doomed negotiators. "My daughters stand as extensions of the throne. Their will and the throne's will are united." It sounded elegant. It sounded ancient. It sounded like an answer. It was not one. Nathan Cole tilted his head a fraction, and I felt an irrational urge to warn the emperor to stop talking. I did not understand why. No one did. A human asking questions was not supposed to feel dangerous. It should have felt amusing, like watching a farm animal inspect a starship engine. Instead, the air in the hall changed. Princess Veilira shifted first. The movement was tiny, just her armored fingers closing once against her palm, but it made the gems along her wrist guard flash blue. She was the war choice. Every noble in the court understood what she represented. If Nathan chose her, Earth would not be conquered. That would have been too crude, too obvious. Earth would be honored, protected, elevated. A fleet would be stationed in orbit for mutual security. Human officers would receive imperial guidance. Earth industries would be modernized under military supervision. In 10 years, their armies would wear our colors. In 20, their children would learn our anthem. In 50, the humans would still call themselves free because we would be polite enough to let them keep the word. Veilira knew it. I saw it in her face when Nathan glanced toward her. She did not look proud. She looked trapped behind armor polished for a ceremony she had not designed. Then there was Princess Salira, the softer cage, the beautiful one, if you liked your chains written in diplomatic language. She carried no blade, no command crest, no fleet seal. Only layered white-violet robes, a calm voice, and the royal authority to turn a signature into a planet's slow surrender. If Nathan chose her, Earth would become a treaty partner. That was what the public record would say. Trade routes, cultural exchange, shared development, peace. Lovely words. The Empire loved lovely words. They traveled farther than warships and left fewer stains on the official archives. But beneath the ceremony, the terms were already waiting. Earth would accept imperial arbitration. Earth would submit border disputes to Vorth courts. Earth would pay symbolic tribute, then administrative tribute, then necessary tribute. then permanent tribute. No invasion. No panic. Just paperwork, applause, and a ribbon around the throat of a planet that thought it had been invited to dinner. Nathan looked from one princess to the other, not like a man choosing between rewards, but like a mechanic studying two engines that had been built to fail in opposite directions. The nobles mistook his silence for awe. Lord Mavrin actually leaned back and whispered, "He understands now. That was our problem. We kept thinking silence meant surrender. Humans use silence differently." Nathan turned slightly, giving the court a clear view of his plain black suit, his empty hands, and his calm, pale face beneath the throne lights. "So the choice is military absorption or legal absorption," he said. The translator delivered the sentence without emotion. The court did not. A ripple moved through the hall, quick and ugly, because he had said the quiet part in public. Princess Vaelira looked down. Princess Salira closed her eyes for 1 second. Emperor Kale's expression did not change, but the banners behind his throne dimmed by a shade as the palace system read the shift in room tension. Nathan noticed that too. Of course he did. He noticed everything. That was when I began to understand the true flaw in the trap. It had been designed for a frightened species. It had not been designed for a man from Earth who had grown up reading warning labels, tax forms, loan contracts, and the fine print at the bottom of every supposedly generous offer. We had given him 2 cages. He had started checking who built the lock. The laughter came back, louder this time, because the court needed it to come back. That is something I did not understand until much later. Powerful rooms laugh when they are certain. Terrified rooms laugh when they need to pretend. Lord Mavrin started it, of course. He had the voice of a tax collector and the courage of someone who had never stood alone in anything smaller than a committee. "Did you hear him?" he called across the lower ring. "Military absorption. Legal absorption. The Earth creature has learned 2 imperial phrases and now believes himself a scholar." The nobles rewarded him with polite amusement. A few admirals tapped their ceremonial staffs against the glass floor. The sound rang out in crisp little clicks, like rain on a windshield during a storm you think will pass. Nathan did not look at them. That annoyed the court more than any insult could have. Mockery is supposed to pull the eyes. It demands reaction. It feeds on the little flinch, the heated face, the desperate correction. Nathan gave them nothing. He simply turned in a slow circle, reading the silver lines beneath his feet, then the vertical inscriptions climbing the pillars, then the old royal clauses carved into the inner arch above the throne. I remember thinking that his eyes moved too steadily for a primitive. Most off-world visitors saw the grand chamber and became lost in the scale of it. The ceiling alone rose nearly 200 feet, painted with the victories of 800 emperors. The throne was cut from a single meteor stone wider than a house in the American suburbs. The banners were each longer than a football field. Everything in that room had been designed to make the individual feel small. Nathan noticed the room. Then he ignored the room and studied the rules. That was when Princess Salira looked at him again. Not as a guest, not as a political object, as a problem the Empire had not calculated. Princess Vaelira saw it too. The war princess had spent her life reading battlefields, and a battlefield is not always dirt, smoke, and flags. Sometimes it is a polished hall full of smiling people waiting for you to step into a sentence that belongs to someone else. The Emperor leaned forward slightly, just slightly. On anyone else, it would have meant curiosity. On Kale Vorith, it meant warning. "Mr. Cole," he said, using the human title like a toy he had found on the floor, "the offer before you is not a debate." Nathan nodded once. "I understand." More laughter. A bad move, I thought then. Agreement sounded like weakness. But Nathan continued before the sound fully died. "That is why I am not debating the offer." He pointed down, not at the princesses, not at the throne, but at the floor itself. "I am reading the part your court is standing on." The laughter thinned. It did not stop. Stopping would have admitted too much. But it thinned. Magistrate Oren stiffened. I saw his assistant check a legal tablet, then freeze with 2 fingers hovering over the glass. The old founding script beneath Nathan's shoes was not ceremonial text. It was binding authority. Every royal act performed in that hall was judged against those clauses by the palace intelligence, the ancient system older than the current dynasty, older than most of the families laughing from the rings above. We all knew that. We simply forgot a human might learn it by looking down. Nathan took 1 step to the left, careful, respectful. almost casual. His shoe stopped beside a line of silver script. "This clause mentions consent," he said. No one laughed then. The word was too clean, too sharp, too close to the hinge of the trap. Emperor Kale's face remained still, but the court around him changed shape without moving. Nobles leaned back. Magistrates leaned forward. Princess Salira's hands folded together, and for the first time since the ceremony began, she looked almost hopeful. Nathan Cole, the soft little man from Earth, had not raised his voice. He had not threatened a soul. He had only found the one word the Empire had hoped nobody would say out loud. Princess Veilira noticed first, because soldiers notice when a battlefield moves under their feet. Until that moment, she had stood like a statue beside Nathan Cole, silver-blue armor catching the throne lights, chin raised, eyes forward, every inch the Empire's perfect blade. That was what the court expected from her. That was what her father had shaped her to be. A symbol with a pulse. A fleet commander with a crown waiting somewhere behind the next war. But when Nathan said consent, Veilira's posture changed by less than an inch, and somehow it felt louder than the laughter had ever been. Her shoulders lowered. Not in defeat. In recognition. Across from her, Princess Salira watched the human with an expression I had never seen on her face before. I had seen her negotiate asteroid rights with 7 merchant houses at once. I had seen her smile through 6 hours of trade insults from the Quran League. I had seen her turn a hostile summit into a banquet without raising her voice. Salira was soft only to people who did not understand silk can still be used as a rope. But in that hall, looking at Nathan, she did not look like a diplomat. She looked like someone who had just realized a locked door had hinges. The Emperor saw his daughters watching the human, and that was what disturbed him more than the question itself. It was one thing for Nathan to read old law. It was another for the princesses to understand why he was reading it. They had been placed there as choices. 2 royal paths for a small planet to walk into obedience. The court looked at them and saw honor. Nathan looked at them and saw 2 people being used as ceremonial tools in front of thousands of witnesses. That was the insult no one had expected from him. Not insult toward the throne. Insight. Far worse. Veilira turned her head toward her father. "Imperial law requires clarity," she said. Her voice was steady, but the hall reacted like a glass had fallen in a silent room. She had not challenged him. Not openly. Not enough for punishment. She had simply repeated a principle every noble child learned before they could sign their own name. Salira followed, quieter. And clarity requires the absence of coercion. I felt my recorder crystal pulse beside my shoulder. It was capturing everything now. Every breath. Every pause. Every noble pretending not to panic. Emperor Kale slowly rose from the throne, and the banners behind him brightened in automatic response, trying to lend majesty to a moment that was slipping away from him. "My daughters speak with the authority of my house," he said. Nathan glanced at Veilira, then at Salira, and for the first time since he entered the hall, he addressed them instead of the Emperor. "Do you?" The question was barely above conversation volume. No accusation. No drama. Just 2 words. But those 2 words did what a fleet could not have done. They separated the princesses from the throne in the minds of every witness present. Veilira did not answer immediately. Salira did not answer either. They did not need to. Silence, in that chamber, had become a language, and now the Empire was hearing its own daughters speak it. Lord Mavrin looked furious. Magistrate Orin looked sick. The admirals looked anywhere but at the floor. As for me, I finally understood why Nathan had smiled earlier. He had never been deciding between 2 princesses. He had been waiting for them to see they had a choice too. The Empire did not fall when Nathan Cole spoke. It did something worse. It waited. For 1 perfect second, every noble, admiral, judge, and royal witness in that hall stared at the human as if silence alone might push the words back into his mouth. Nathan stood between the 2 princesses with his hands relaxed at his sides, the silver law script shining beneath his shoes, and asked the question that turned an imperial ceremony into a public test. If choice is forced, is it still royal consent? That was all. No grand speech. No raised voice. No threat. Just 1 sentence, spoken in the calm tone of a man asking a bank clerk to explain a strange fee on a mortgage statement. Emperor Kale Vorith did not move. Princess Veilira's armor lights dimmed to a softer blue. Princess Salira looked down at the ancient floor as if she had been standing on a key her entire life and had never been allowed to notice it. I remember the sound that followed. Not laughter, not outrage. The soft, collective intake of breath from thousands of powerful creatures realizing the question had not been addressed to them. It had been addressed to the palace itself. The royal intelligence responded before any magistrate could interfere. A column of white light rose from the silver script at Nathan's feet, thin at first, then bright enough to paint the underside of the throne in cold fire. The voice that emerged was not male or female. It was older than dynasty, older than fashion, older than excuses. Royal consent requires voluntary declaration, informed awareness, and absence of coercive circumstance. No one breathed. The palace had spoken. Not an advisor. Not a rebel. Not some human lawyer from a noisy blue planet. The palace. The same ancient system that had crowned Emperor Kale, validated his decrees, and recorded every royal union for nearly 900 years. Nathan gave the smallest nod, as if the answer matched what he expected. Of course it did. That irritated me more than fear would have. Fear would have been normal. Surprise would have been acceptable. Nathan looked like a man hearing a vending machine return the correct change. Emperor Kale's eyes narrowed. The palace confirms general principle, he said. It does not judge this ceremony. That was when Nathan finally turned fully toward him. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough for the entire court to follow the motion. Then ask it, Nathan said. For words. Clean. Simple. Cruel in their precision. The emperor stared down from the throne, and I saw the trap reverse. If he refused, he admitted uncertainty. If he asked, he risked judgment. If he changed the subject, every witness in the room would know why. Lord Mavrin opened his mouth, perhaps to object, perhaps to save his emperor with noise. Princess Vaelira cut him off without even looking at him. Let the palace answer. Her voice was calm, but every fleet officer in the chamber straightened. Then Salira spoke, softer, and somehow that was worse. If the ceremony is lawful, the throne has. Nothing to fear. The emperor's daughters had not rebelled. They had simply asked for the rules. It was amazing how dangerous fairness sounded when spoken in the wrong room. Nathan stepped back half a pace, giving the center of the floor to the throne, and that small courtesy made the emperor look cornered without Nathan ever touching him. The palace light waited. The court waited. History waited. And for the first time since I had entered imperial service, Emperor Kale Vorith had to answer a question he had not prepared himself to control. Emperor Kale Vorith had ruled long enough to understand that hesitation can wound authority more deeply than defeat. So he did what emperors always do when the room begins to tilt. He tried to make the floor seem level. He rose to his full height, letting the throne lights catch the gold edges of his ceremonial mantle, and spoke in the voice that had ended trade disputes, border crises, and succession challenges before they had time to breathe. Palace intelligence. Validate the current royal offering as lawful under imperial precedent. It was a careful command, not the question Nathan had asked, not the danger at the center of the room. A lesser species might have missed that. Nathan Cole did not. The white column of palace light flickered once, processing the wording, and for half a second the court relaxed. I saw Lord Mavrin smile. I saw Magistrate Oren lower his tablet. I saw the admirals remember how to stand like victors again. Then Nathan raised one hand. Not high, not dramatic, just enough. Objection to phrasing, he said. The translator carried it cleanly through the hall. Several nobles stared as if the human had just interrupted gravity. Nathan looked toward the palace light, not the emperor. The question is not whether an offering exists under precedent. The question is whether the two royal participants are free to refuse without penalty, loss of status, or political punishment. Princess Salira inhaled softly. Princess Vaelira did not move at all, which, for her, was louder than a shout. The palace light brightened. Emperor Kale's expression hardened. You have no standing to object in this court. Nathan nodded. Correct. That single word confused everyone. Humans have a talent for agreeing at the worst possible moment. He continued, calm as ever. I do not object as a judge. I object as the person being required to choose. If my answer creates legal consequences, then I have standing over my answer. The palace light pulsed. Standing recognized. The words landed like a door locking from the wrong side. I felt my recorder crystal vibrate beside me, unable to decide whether it was capturing diplomacy or the beginning of a constitutional crisis. Nathan turned to the princesses, and his voice changed. Not softer exactly. More human. Princess Veilira. Princess Salira. I am not going to choose between you. The court erupted, not in laughter this time, but in sharp whispers, legal protests, and the brittle noise of status trying not to crack. Emperor Kale lifted his hand for silence, but Nathan spoke before the room fully obeyed. I choose your right to refuse. That was the third option. Not war. Not treaty. Not surrender wrapped in ceremony. He chose the one thing the Empire had not placed on the table because the Empire had forgotten people were allowed to be more than pieces. The palace light expanded until the silver script across the entire floor shone white. Choice entered, it said. Subject of choice. Royal consent rights of Princess Veilira Thorn and Princess Salira Voss. Lord Mavrin went pale green. Magistrate Oren sat down without being invited. The admirals looked at the princesses now, not as symbols, but as witnesses. Emperor Kale understood it then. So did I. Nathan had not refused the Empire. That would have made him rude, perhaps dangerous, perhaps dismissible. Instead, he had accepted the rules so completely that the rules had turned around and faced the throne. Princess Veilira looked at Nathan for one long second. Then she removed the fleet seal from her wrist and held it at her side. Princess Salira touched the edge of her diplomatic chain and let it fall loose against her robe. They had not spoken yet. They did not need to. Nathan Cole had given them the one thing no one in that hall had dared to offer. A choice that belonged to them. The palace did not ask for permission to continue. That was the first sign the throne had lost control of the room. For 900 years, the royal intelligence had served as witness, archive, and ceremonial judge, silent unless summoned, precise unless manipulated, loyal not to a person but to the founding compact carved beneath our feet. Now its white light spread through every silver line in the floor, climbing the pillars, crossing the arch above the throne, illuminating clauses most of us had treated as decoration for our entire lives. Consent review initiated, the palace announced. Emperor Kale remained standing, but his shadow no longer reached the center of the hall. The light had cut it apart. Nathan Cole stepped back again, careful not to stand between the princesses and the law. That was what made the moment unbearable. He did not take the center after winning it. He gave it away. Humans do that sometimes, I later learned. They break a lock and then hold the door open for someone else. Princess Veilira looked at the fleet seal in her hand as if seeing it for the first time. It was a narrow band of blue metal, bright with command authority, heavy with every order her father had ever placed on her shoulders. Palace, she said, voice steady. If I decline the war union, will I lose command status? The white light answered without hesitation. Under current imperial decree, yes. A sound passed through the admirals, not quite protest, not quite shame. Veilira nodded once. She had expected it. That made it worse. Princess Salira lifted her diplomatic chain. The violet stones along it shimmered softly. If I decline the treaty union, will my authority over external accords be suspended? Under current imperial decree, yes, said the palace. Salira smiled then, but it was not her court smile. It was smaller, sadder, real. Then the offer was never free. The palace light flared so bright that several nobles shielded their eyes. Coercive circumstance confirmed. Those 3 words changed the empire more than any fleet movement I had ever recorded. The ceremony was no longer an honor. It was no longer a gift. It was no longer a choice between 2 royal futures. It was evidence. Emperor Kale struck the armrest of the throne with his palm, not violently, but sharply enough to make the sound carry. The palace exceeds its function. The palace answered him in the same calm voice. The palace performs its founding function. That was when Magistrate Oren stood. Poor Oren. He had spent 60 years surviving by agreeing with whichever direction power was already moving. Now power had moved beneath the floor and left him guessing. The ancient compact requires immediate suspension of any royal proceeding found coercive, he said, each word costing him a little more color. Lord Mavrin hissed at him to sit down. Oren did not. That may have been the bravest thing I ever saw him do. Nathan looked toward the emperor, and for one heartbeat the entire court expected him to gloat. He did not. He simply said, Earth withdraws from any agreement created by this ceremony. Clean. Legal. Final. The palace responded instantly. Withdrawal recognized. No penalty applicable. There it was. The escape hatch. Not only for Nathan. For Earth. For the princesses. For every witness now realizing the Emperor had built a trap inside a courthouse and invited the courthouse to watch. Valyra removed the fleet seal completely and placed it on the glowing floor. Solyra unclasped the diplomatic chain and set it beside the seal. Two small objects. Two quiet sounds. An empire learning that silence can be heavier than surrender. Emperor Kael looked down at his daughters, then at Nathan, and I saw the truth arrive in his face. The human had not defeated him by refusing to play. Nathan had played perfectly. He had followed every rule, honored every clause, respected every title, and left the throne standing alone against its own law. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt crowded. It carried every treaty the Empire had twisted, every ceremony it had polished until the cage looked like honor, every noble smile that had mistaken obedience for peace. Emperor Kael Vorith remained above us on the obsidian throne, but height no longer meant power. Not in that room. Not after the palace itself had recognized the withdrawal. Not after both princesses had placed their symbols on the glowing floor and stepped away from the futures chosen for them. Nathan Cole stood a few feet behind them, hands still relaxed, face still calm, looking almost ordinary beneath the white law light. That was the worst part. If he had arrived with a fleet, we could have understood him. If he had shouted threats, we could have named him uncivilized and dismissed him. If he had demanded tribute, territory, apology, or revenge, the court would have known which old drawer to place him in. But he asked for none of it. He took nothing except the right to leave with Earth untouched and two princesses unclaimed. In imperial politics, mercy is often treated as weakness. That day, it sounded like a warning. Princess Valyra turned first toward Nathan and lowered her head, not as a soldier to a commander, but as one free person acknowledging another. Princess Solyra followed, placing one hand over her heart in the old diplomatic gesture for debt without ownership. Nathan looked uncomfortable with both gestures, which only made the room more unsettled. Humans, I began to realize, have a strange relationship with power. They can hold it in their hands and act as if someone has handed them a cup of coffee they did not order. Lord Mavrin tried one final time to save the shape of the world he understood. This cannot stand, he said, though his voice had lost the crisp arrogance from earlier. A foreigner cannot expose royal procedure and walk out honored. Nathan finally looked at him. Not coldly, not angrily, just directly. Then do not build procedures you are afraid to explain. The sentence was so plain that it almost passed for advice. It was not advice. It was a door closing. Magistrate Oren, now pale but standing straighter than I had ever seen him, announced the formal suspension of the ceremony. The palace confirmed it. The court record sealed it. My recorder crystal, traitorous little thing that it was, preserved every second. The empire did not collapse that day. Empires rarely do anything so honest. But something cracked that could not be repaired with banners, speeches, or revised minutes. By the next cycle, 3 border worlds requested reviews of their tribute contracts. By the next week, 5 noble houses began quietly removing coercive clauses from old agreements. By the next month, the phrase human consent question had become a diplomatic nightmare whispered in every chamber where beautiful traps were being prepared. As for Emperor Kael, he remained on the throne, but never again did he host a ceremony on the silver founding script without first asking what it might say back. Nathan Cole left the hall without escort, walking past admirals, judges, trade lords, and royal witnesses who had laughed at him less than an hour earlier. No one laughed now. Princess Valyra watched him go with the expression of a commander reassessing an entire battlefield. Princess Solyra watched him like a diplomat who had just discovered a language older than fear. And I, Lord Arvex Wren, official witness of the Vorith Empire, recorded the final truth with my own hand. We had forced a human to choose because we believed choice was a trap. He showed us choice was a weapon we had forgotten how to respect. That is why the Empire went silent. Not because Nathan Cole chose a princess. Because he looked at the throne, the law, the court, the cage, and calmly chose the one thing no empire can survive losing forever. The right to say no.